The problem with therapy, particularly for the anxious, introspective overthinker. And that's what this video is going to be titled, I think. But it's really just about, it's also about just in general how we go about deciding how to live our lives and what's good for us, what's bad for us, what's the right path, all the usual stuff that I like to anxiously, introspectively overthink about. But so why the title? Why is the title about, why therapy? I already forgot what the title was. But something about why therapy is not good for, or doesn't really work, generally speaking, we'll say, for this certain type of person that I'm referring to, who is me. And I haven't really been to therapy recently, so, maybe I should give it, the 100th try, and maybe it's disingenuous or sort of missing the mark, misguided in some way to claim that I've received no benefit from the times I've gone in the past. I'm sure that there was something beneficial, but there's always that whole thing of, right, just because something has some benefit, well, going on a walk has a benefit, drinking some orange juice, for everything, even a donut probably has some benefit, but we're not talking about if there's any benefit. We're talking about really the expected benefit, the significance, the cost benefit analysis, and so on. So, I think sometimes we make that mistake. Not, but anyway, who knows if that's even possible to properly. It's difficult to properly analyze that anyway. But so let's get to the point though. After this 2-minute ramble, so what I think is often missing is the reality that everything kind of does boil down to kind of, I would call it, like if I was inventing a new therapy, which I'm sure this is not really an invention, there's probably something that's the same exact thing with a different word, or, but we'd call it RRG therapy. Risks, rewards, goals. Because that's what I think it really boils down to, is that you have the goals, and if you don't have them, or if you struggle to establish them, no matter how much you think about it, talk about it, whatever, I mean, that's its own thing. I don't know how can you pull them out of thin air? Are the goals just your natural, whatever that means, but just your intuitive desires? Is that what the goal is just following those desires, and where do they lead you? But let's just kind of put that aside for now and say that you can establish some goals. So you have these goals, whatever they may be, or maybe the goals do fluctuate as you do the analysis of, okay, I have these 10 goals. Here are the risks and the rewards in even pursuing of these goals. Maybe I actually need to really focus on 2 of them, or 5 of them, or maybe there's at least some of them that need to be dropped entirely, because even though they are goals, or maybe I'm using that word interchangeably with desires, and maybe that's not, I don't know, should every desire be a goal? It's an unanswerable thing. Now, someone will tell you there is an answer, right? Some wise philosopher, psychologist, scientist, whatever, some authority figure will say that this is why, or maybe they can even come up with some statistic, probability of something or other, or some research on what makes most people, whatever, right? But the problem with all of that stuff, especially when it comes to the most people thing, is we don't always know that if you are the most people or not. We don't always know if you're the most people or not. And certainly with any of that kind of stuff, I mean, how often is it everyone reacts this way to this thing? This is the right, So that's part of the problem with all that stuff. But so goals, risks, rewards. And I think the thing that sometimes is difficult just for the average person, your average friend, and your average therapist, is no matter what they think that they are, what they've been taught, they come into this world as a friend, as a therapist, family member, whoever, and they have this whole value system. They have their bias, personal experiences that you can't just turn off. Now, and they have the bias of what makes them tick and what their risks and rewards are and how they would approach things based on their own formula that might really not apply to you at all. There's some overlap. Humans are humans, Most people don't think that the risk-reward equation, most people meaning 99.9 of just chilling out your hand on the stove is just not whatever potential pleasure comes from that. There's an outlier out there, I'm sure, but for the most part, right? So there's some extremes in those things we can kind of say, that's more or less almost a borderline universal truth with what, how these risk rewards work. But when it comes to anything that's not just the most extreme obvious thing, and we have to be careful, most people actually think a lot of things are extremely obvious that aren't. That's the danger too. But yeah, so everyone comes in with all these biases. And so the whole point though of the therapist, yes, they're kind of trained, at least in the therapeutic setting, more or less how to not be an asshole, right? Allow someone to speak, don't interrupt, don't be judgmental, try to give positive regard, right? Even when they're saying things that maybe inside you're judging, don't necessarily let the, even if you might think, wow, that's, this person's annoying, right? Whatever it may be. So there's all these things that essentially a therapist is trained in large part. Here's how you just kind of don't be an asshole, right? And maybe just through not being an asshole, the client sort of gains something by, having a place to have a human listen to them and give them positivity. And as they talk through their problems, maybe they come to some realizations. And of course, different therapists do different things. Some are way more proactive than just simply listening and paraphrasing, right? They might really have some more, we'll say, assertive, I don't know what the right word is, approaches. But yeah, I guess the point that I'm trying to get at though is that what it really comes down to is that only you really know, and you probably don't know, but only you could know if you were able to discover through, analyzing yourself, right? Or, maybe even through the therapist, maybe that does provide you a space to do that. If you get that that's what's happening, you can't rely on the therapist to have this approach because, like I said, the average therapist, it's nothing particularly special in my opinion, but you're figuring out, okay, what risks am I willing to take for certain goals? What are the rewards? What are the risks? And, it just, I don't know. It sounds so obvious, and maybe it is, but I think we don't really know how to analyze this. And I'm not sure that there's a clear way to analyze this. It's more, I guess the point is more of the recognition or the reminder that, trying to look for sort of someone that has the answers. They don't. There's people with varying levels of confidence. There's people that have varying degrees of what you want. And what that shows you is if they have what you want, their framework of their genetics, their environment, the various attributes that make them who they are, allow them to get there through a certain path, which honestly, even then, it could be a sort of luck to some degree, if you will. There could be someone with very similar attributes who just by, tripping at the wrong place at the wrong time, ended up in complete poverty with no loved ones and so on, compared to the other person who actually started out very similar and had all the ideas of success that you might imagine. But I think this is kind of where religion and anything of the sort comes into play. And under this, I will put therapy, right? the therapist is the modern day, for some people anyway. It's a figure. You're doing confession. You're going to the priest, the pastor, the rabbi, whatever, and if they tell you that you're doing okay, or that here's how you can be okay, right? You have just this automatic sort of faith and trust. And I think maybe in some sense it's not necessarily a bad thing. Do I think that any of the religious figures or the therapists, that they actually have a sort of hold on truth, or they really have the ultimate path to your well-being? No. It's more that there's the thing of, you can place your faith in anything and anyone, and there might automatically be a certain amount of advantages to it. Now, of course, if you do that to someone who's a cult leader and they ultimately want you to drink some poison Kool-Aid, well, yes, certainly the benefits that are gained through just the act of placing your faith in something arbitrarily are pretty much, the risk reward, the sort of benefits of that clearly are diminished by the poisoned Kool-Aid. But in general, I think this is where there is some truth to this sort of cliche. Oh, you gotta have faith in something, man. Now, I don't think people really know what they're saying when they say that, right? I mean, some people do. Some people do to some extent. Will say maybe there's some sort of understanding that, the bedrock of philosophical questions is always, there's always some premise that you're sort of accepting without evidence per se, or that the evidence always is going to eventually lead to something like, well, this is what my senses are perceiving. I'm perceiving this thing, but I could be wrong, because I could be the only person in some sort of false simulation and everyone else is in the real simulation, or whatever that may mean. But everything always comes down, there's some sort of assumption that you have to make. But I think beyond that sort of view of putting your faith in something, I think there is clearly a psychological benefit to saying, okay, I am going to put faith and trust in something. And it could be one of the traditional religions. Now, I find that to be kind of boring for a lot of reasons, not worth getting into, right? You can do your own research on why religion in general with too much inspection is annoying. You probably already know that if you're watching this video. You probably already have that feeling yourself, honestly, the few champ watchers that might be out there. But yeah, you pick something else then. I mean, anything. And I guess this is what people traditionally, commonly call, meaning, purpose, all of these things. And I've questioned that a lot. Like, what does it mean to have a life purpose? What does it mean for things to be meaningful? Or is there a meaning to life, and all these things? And I think actually, you can break all this stuff down, but really what it is it has nothing to do with anything other than what are you going to choose to put on a pedestal? And if you put nothing on a pedestal, I think that doesn't work for almost anyone. Always, as we said before, always exceptions to any rule, and who knows, everyone's psychological makeup is different or whatever. But I'd say really for the vast majority of people, something has to be put on a pedestal. And maybe it is true that to some degree it could be anything. That, or at least most of the time, for most people, putting something on a pedestal is better than putting nothing on a pedestal, right? And sometimes it doesn't actually have to be a thing that's just like, well, I'll just know it's just naturally going to come up for me, whatever that pedestal thing is. It might just be, I'm going to make a choice. I'm going to make a choice to put this thing on a pedestal, because I realize this process of there's a lot of negative things that come from putting nothing on a pedestal. So I need to go ahead and pick something. Yeah, and I meant to circle back to the beginning of the video. I think I didn't really get into as much as I wanted to, the original idea, the whole, what's therapy like, or why therapy doesn't work or something for the anxious, introspective overthinker. And the point that I really wanted to make more that I didn't quite get to is, I think a lot of people, even in the risk-reward equation, they kind of see things as being, well, here's 2 risks, 2 rewards. I can kind of figure that out. Whereas for the person who is particularly anxious, but also the overthinker, the introspective overthinker, they're going to realize the truth, or maybe it's you could say it's a false truth, maybe it's exaggerated, maybe there really are 2 main risks and rewards to kind of most things, and it is sort of a false, even though the reality is that with every decision, there's a billion risks and rewards, and it's all a complicated equation that makes sort of making a decision much more nuanced and burdensome, in seeing that there's so many different things, or that the fact that you think a lot about a lot of different things, therefore there's weights put into so many things that can kind of lead to sort of a feeling of fear and stagnation, and maybe ultimately a bit of pointlessness, because the more factors there are, the more things just seem sort of arbitrary and out of your control, and some sort of combination of that. But I think there is also something real happening there, even though maybe it is exaggerated, that most things, there are really, whatever risks, rewards are the main ones that roll off your tongue might be the ones that really have any sort of relevance worthy of analysis. And it's almost just disordered, right? Thinking beyond that is a bit disordered, but some of us are a bit disordered, I guess, whether we want to call that truth or introspection or just being disordered. Maybe too much truth thinking is disordered, right? There's, if you want to be well adjusted, you have to adopt some level of simplicity, regardless of the complexity of reality. Being healthy is ignoring the complexity, at least in some major areas in life. And so maybe that is kind of what I was getting at, even though I didn't explain it in that way. But some of what I was talking about before is sort of why that risk-reward goal equation can be particularly complicated, even for people that think a lot, that are often described as being overthinkers. So, yeah, the answer that I'm proposing is, 1, to understand, of course, just a reminder that everyone is sort of biased according to their own particular brand of brainwashing and conditioning and so on, and regardless of what sort of authoritative status they hold, they're not the bearer of all truth, no matter who it is. Religious leader, atheist leader, right-wing leader, left-wing leader, psychologist, philosopher, it doesn't matter, right? They don't, none of them have it. They don't have it, right? They might have some things that you, for whatever reason, you find compelling or not, but, so yeah, understanding that. Also understanding that, yes, to have more, I won't say to be happy, right? Because that's what's to be happy, and there's always ebbs and flows, and it's complicated and all that stuff. But to have more of the happy stuff in life, to have a chance at having a good hour, let's just say even a good hour, a good 5 minutes, a good few days, right? You have to cultivate some simplicity in your life, at least in some ways, right? Maybe it's best if you can have simplicity in every way, right? And that's probably a bit unrealistic anyway, but right, that's part of the draw of the religion thing. That's part of the draw of people's politics these days, right? Everything to them is about what a good left-winger they are. Everything is about what a good right-winger they are, right? It's the appeal of simplicity. And while on some level I think that can be quite foolish and even destructive, it's important to see why that's so compelling to people, why people are drawn to it, and to understand, yes, we do all need some simplicity and to put our faith in something. But I'm arguing perhaps that we can find simplicity and find faith in something that's more interesting than the things that most people seem to generally be choosing.